Um, so there we go. I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I have been around this summer, but kind of not because you haven't seen me on campus. So it's been really fun to say hello to the folks here at Walnut Creek and looking forward to seeing you all at Albany tomorrow. And I'm actually super duper excited to be welcoming Chandler Green back from Key Collective. He's the executive director over there, and he was the person who presented the last time for us on campus. And I think all of us collectively really appreciated what you had to say, Chandler. And I know many of us have used some of the techniques and tools that you shared with us. So super excited for this part two. And I just, because we're here online, it's not ideal, but I wanted to have this format partly so that we're all here hearing the same thing and hopefully participating and asking questions that we can all benefit from. But I also wanted to record it so that if you want to look back, see, what we talked about, and also for our new teachers, the goal today is really looking at DBT and really seeing how it can be applied to our students with the highest needs. We're seeing more and more students with high needs coming to Tilden, and at the same time, we have heard your concerns, which is how do we work with these students? How do we become effective when we are working with these students, and what kind of supports are we going to need, and when do you just kind of say, hey, you know what, I need support from somebody else? So please, feel free to take notes, have your snacks and lunch and all of that. But having Chandler here is just an amazing opportunity. So I really hope that you're able to take advantage of it. And I know there are some computers that don't have web cameras, but if you do have your web camera, if you wouldn't mind turning it on, just so we can all be present here and make our be able to share our reactions in real time, that would be great. Um, Before we get started, does anybody have any questions? All right, cool. All right, Chandler, there you go.
Thank you so much, Lori, for the kind words and warm introduction. It's so nice to be here with you all today. Thank you for welcoming me. I truly see it as an honor to be able to kind of do a part two training. I really enjoyed doing it back in spring of this year, and I'm excited to be here with you all as you prepare for this upcoming school year. So thank you for being here today. I can't see all of you, so if people have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or maybe use the raise hand function that should alert me. If I end up not seeing, I don't know what it's going to look like once I start the presentation, so I'll be looking at my slide deck. But if you do have a question or your hand's been raised, I'm not seeing you, just unmic and say, hey, Chandler, I have a question, and I'm happy to pause and wherever I'm at. And I encourage participation and engagement. So thank you all. I'll go ahead and start the presentation. Okay. Everyone can see this? Okay, perfect. All right, so this is part two of supporting neurodiverse students' mental health through a dialectical behavioral therapy lens, also known as DBT. And my name is Chandler. I am an associate marriage and family therapist and executive director of Key Collective. So today's agenda is going to include, welcoming of all of us here to this space, and also doing a little bit of a recap, a refresher of what I spoke about last time. And then we will have some case vignettes focused on 4 different kinds of student profiles, which I'm really excited about. Over the summer, Lori and I met a few times and collaborated on what really would be the most helpful for me to present on for you guys. And my goal is that I can curate a training that is going to be applicable for you, that is relevant to the students that you're working with. And so once we get a little further on in the presentation, you will see the 4 kinds of common profiles that you guys are seeing more and more, which I'm excited to talk about how we can specifically support those students through a DBT lens. There'll be an application activity. And then, we'll kind of synthesize everything we learned where people can kind of share their takeaways. And then, of course, there'll be Q&A for anyone that has additional questions or comments, too, that they would like to share. So I kind of just already introduced myself, but a little bit of a refresher. I've been with Key Collective for about, the Key organization. We have a sister company called Key Healthcare. I am the executive director and partner of Key Collective, and I've been with the organization for about almost 6 years now. As mentioned, I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice. In addition to the work I do at Key, I work with individuals and couples in the state of California. I actually do have a few patients that live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I see them virtually. And I also have an in-person office down in Los Angeles. And I'm really passionate about DBT. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of speaking on this modality, is because I have seen it be so effective and life-changing for so many of my patients, and just working in this field. I think it's really important to be able to offer students, patients, just colleagues, even like skills, ways to regulate, and what are tools that they can use on a day-to-day to kind of help navigate distress and other kinds of stressors. So in addition to practicing from a DBT lens, I'm also very psychodynamic oriented, which means I really like doing that depth work, kind of getting to the root of it and doing that kind of deep processing in session. So that's a little bit about me as a clinician and how I do therapy with clients. And if anyone wants to learn more about that later on, you can feel free to ask. So what is DBT? Let's just kind of remind ourselves. Like, as I said, the acronym stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, and it was founded in the 1980s by Dr. Marsha Linehan, who is a renowned leader in the field. She's still alive today. She's based out of Washington, and it was initially created for clients who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, BPD, which for many, many years, and unfortunately even today, depending on who you speak to, some providers still have this notion that this disorder is not curable, which I want you all to know is not true. You actually can be in remission for BPD. It is a very complicated diagnosis, and oftentimes it can be hard to form a therapeutic alliance. And so a lot of clinicians or psychiatrists actually don't want to work with this population because of that reason. Lots of people diagnosed with BPD have experienced, adverse early childhood experiences and also just a lot of trauma. And so I have a lot of compassion for this population. It's what I specialize in treating in my private practice. You all are working with adolescents, so you can't actually technically be diagnosed with a personality disorder until the age of 18, but you may be seeing traits in students. You may be noticing, if this doesn't get worked on or we're not intervening now, this could fully develop into a personality disorder. And so DBT has been adapted since, and it has been proven to be very effective for not just borderline personality disorder, but those who are struggling with substance use, anxiety, adolescence, eating disorders, and neurodivergence. And it's an evidence-based practice, and it has been used for many, many years in various levels of care. And it's very skills focused, which is, I think, really helpful for you guys as educators. Like, what can I offer my students, but also what can you offer yourselves in moments of distress and dysregulation? And, at the core of DBT is mindfulness. And every single one of us can benefit from having a mindfulness practice. And so, for many, many reasons, pathology aside, I think that this kind of modality can be really effective for everyone. And so I just listed 3 of the core skill areas. And just to repeat, mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and the 4th one is interpersonal effectiveness. So you can kind of think of that as, how can I have healthy relationships? How can I have an easier time holding boundaries? How can I maintain self-respect in my relationship? That is what that pillar primarily focuses on. Emotional regulation is, how can I tolerate these really uncomfortable feelings right now? Distress tolerance primarily focused on, how can I avoid making a situation worse? Because when we are really distressed, what we can do, of course, not intentionally, but very easily, is we can make it even worse than it is. And so distress tolerance is focused on de-escalation and making the situation more manageable. And mindfulness is, how can we be fully present in this moment without judgment? That is the simple, straightforward definition of mindfulness. And so I would love to hear from all of you, since the part 1 training, if there's anything that anyone has tried or noticed after our last training that you'd like to share with all of us today. Whether it was maybe a skill that you implemented, or a principle of DBT, or a worksheet that you referenced. It could be really anything that you took away from part 1 that you tried to use, or maybe you just had thoughts about that you would kind of like to share. Yes.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the mindfulness aspect of things. I find that slowing down with students and allowing them to, ask questions or really dive in deeper to a specific concept without needing to go so quickly throughout lessons, even in higher levels of grades. It really allows a student to take it all in and to apply it when necessary.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that you've seen the benefits of slowing students down and how they actually may be able to engage with the material a little bit more better or effective when we're not rushing through it, right? And checking in with them, like, how is this landing? Do you have questions about it? What's coming up for you?
I just wanted to chime in. I spoke with a teacher at Albany, and I think one of the skills that they found really effective is pausing and kind of checking in. Where are they? Where's the student? And actually, where are they on the scale of, emotions and how they're feeling? So I think that was also really helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Lori. Joseph.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the idea of being mindful has been really helpful. And sometimes when you have defiant behaviors, there's more going on underneath the surface. So I had a student that was really dependent on using his iPad, but instead of engaging in that tug of war of put the iPad down, don't use the iPad, I tried to just understand what his interests were, and we were able to connect in that way. And eventually I got him to put the iPod down. We could go for a little walk. And I think that we were really making headway in that sense, rather than just trying to have a battle of wills. It makes a lot more sense to try and connect with the student, because they would always talk about how they were having a hard week or a hard day. And it just seemed like there were emotional needs that weren't being met. And so they were using the iPad to kind of cope with that. So that's something that I've used that I feel like has been effective, is trying to be mindful and just, rather than just trying to jump straight into the material, try to understand them and their interests. That way it's easier to work with them.
Thank you for sharing that, Joseph. I also love some of the language you used. As we get further along in the presentation, I actually used the phrase as well, what's underneath the surface. So I love where your mind's at and how you're thinking about it, and how mindfulness allowed for that moment of reflection, right? And pause, because I can imagine it is so easy. And sometimes we, in the role that you guys are in, you may feel this pull to get into a power struggle, right? It's like, I don't want to condone this behavior. I don't want to send missed messages that like you can show up in class this way. And while that's a natural response, we know that oftentimes that's only going to increase the level of dysregulation in the student. And so we have to be able to figure out other ways to communicate with them. And that's what we're going to talk more about today as well. Something that I think is really important, and again, I'm really going to always try to bring this back to the role that you all are in, which is a super important role, and valuable role as educators, and especially in the way that kind of Tilden is organized, how you're doing a lot of one-on-one work. It's important to remember, validate before problem solving. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we may see a student who is having a really hard time and they're clearly in a state of distress. And so because it's hard for us to kind of witness that, we may want to just fix it really quick, as fast as we can. But what can end up happening is sometimes inadvertently we are invalidating them, because maybe what they actually really need and want in that moment is just someone to hear them out, just to be curious, just to ask like, what's going on for you? And then eventually move to a place of problem solving. But it's not always recommended to lead with a solution focused mind, because of that person potentially now feeling invalidated, that like, oh, my feelings are too big, I'm too much, you can't handle it, so you just want to give me the answer. And maybe they're not ready for the answer. So that's something to kind of think about as well. What I like to say is, you can always offer to the student, do you want solution or do you want me just to hear you out? Both are okay. What do you think you need? And then you're helping them practice self-advocacy and thinking about what is it in that moment that they need. In order to do that, they also have to be mindful. So you're kind of encouraging mindfulness in that moment as well. Skills, not fixes. So what this means in terms of like DBT, this is very like at the core of one of the kind of the core philosophies, is we're not always looking for a quick fix to make a problem disappear, because the reality is that we can't always fix emotions, situations, or people. It's not in our control. But fortunately, what DBT does is it gives people skills they can use to better cope, regulate, and respond in a more effective way. So for example, if a student is having a meltdown in class, you as the educator may not have a fix, because you can't erase their frustration, their anxiety, or maybe home stress that's being triggered in that moment. It's outside of your control. But what you can do is you can validate their feelings. You can say, I see this is really overwhelming for you right now. And then you can follow up with maybe offering a skill and doing the skill with them, such as, let's both take a slow breath together and pause before we proceed. So I believe I mentioned this in the part 1, and if I didn't, we're going to go over it anyways, but there's something called the SUDS scale in DBT. And what that stands for is subjective units of distress. And you can kind of think of it as a thermometer. So depending on where you are on the scale is going to determine like what types of skills to use. And so typically, if you are between like 0 and 3, you're able to use interpersonal effectiveness skills. And when you're between 4 and 7, you're definitely in a more like kind of moderate distress state, you know, you're uncomfortable, you're having feelings, but you're still functional. Whereas, you know, earlier you're like slightly distressed, you know, you're maybe a little agitated, but it's not creating a lot of dysfunction. So when you're like in the middle of the scale, you probably want to focus on emotional regulation, which could be like changing how you feel about the situation as best as you can. And when you're on the other end of the scale, like 8 to 10, you're hot, you're on fire, you're like really upset, you're probably shutting down, you're maybe feeling really intense physical sensations, you're maybe experiencing like a form of blackout rage or, you know, intense crying. At that moment, we just want to focus on distress tolerance skills because it's already really intense, and what we're trying to do is be skillful in that moment to not make the situation worse than it already is. And at that point, we're just trying to tolerate. That's it. Until we bring ourselves down on the scale, then we can probably figure out what is the solution. See, this is an example. When you're between 8 and 100, or 8 and 10, rather, you're not in a state of mind where you probably can engage in effective problem solution. So, you know, you probably just want to be mindful of what's coming up for you in that moment versus trying to solve the problem. Any questions on that before we move on to the next slide? Okay. So validation is really important, and especially in your guys' role where you have such an ability to make a wonderful impact on your students. And maybe you are actually an example of a healthy relationship with an adult, because unfortunately we know that it's probably at least one of the students that you've worked with or are currently working with has a complicated relationship with their primary caregivers, where maybe they don't feel a lot of warmth or support or really validation. And when we are invalidated, it increases our level of dysregulation. And it's actually been scientifically proven that when someone is validated, it actually lowers their level of dysregulation and kind of moderates their central nervous system. It can really actually decrease the level of activation. So I'm really gonna like drive this point home that most people end up acting out or are escalating when they don't feel heard or when they don't feel seen or when they are invalidated. So validation is a must. It is a key to communication in all healthy, positive relationships. And what I want to try to, speak about today with you guys is we can always validate the emotion. And oftentimes what we're trying to do in these situations is validate the emotion, not the behavior. So if a student got really angry and they ended up, breaking one of your supplies, let's say they, broke your pencil sharpener. Of course, the act of breaking the pencil sharpener is not valid. That's not appropriate. But the emotion that they were experiencing beforehand that led to that behavior, we could find ways to validate that emotion. So that's a good phrase to keep in your mind. Validate the emotion, not the behavior. And sometimes there's this misconception that validating is the same as like, oh, I have to agree with everything that person said or did. And that's not true, actually. Validating is not necessarily always agreeing. It's finding the kernel of truth, what DBT says. Like when we try to come from a place of understanding and trying to understand that person's emotional experience, there's always some opportunity to validate how they got to that place. And then it's your kind of job to tell them, well, the way that you handled this emotion kind of led to this outcome, and this outcome, doesn't serve you. This outcome creates more problems for you. This outcome, this behavior impacts our relationship. So let's try to figure out other ways to feel and express our anger. This is just a slide to remind us all, which I know this is very important to Children Prep, which I really admire, and respect that you guys, all of you here on this call today, understand the importance of mental health, especially when it comes to your students. And I wish more schools, joined you in this, but it's really awesome that you guys see the importance of looking at the student as well in terms of their mental health. So as I mentioned, we're gonna focus our presentation on 4 different student profiles. And those profiles are going to be autism spectrum disorder, ADHD/ADD. So ADD is no longer in the DSM, so it's now all just under the umbrella of ADHD. We're going to look at learning differences, and then students with trauma who are oftentimes manifesting and kind of acting out. And the goal is going to be identifying the behaviors that are happening, right, and that you're witnessing, and we're going to try to respond to these behaviors through a DBT-informed lens. So the framework for our training is we're going to, observing the behavior. And this is what you guys, I would like for you to kind of get in the mode of right now, and then, hopefully be able to translate this into the work with your students, is observing what's happening in front of you without judgment, noticing that whatever is going on in the student. And then, like what Joseph just said a couple moments ago, ask yourself, what may be happening underneath? What is causing this outward kind of expression? And then trying as best as you can to respond to whatever's happening in front of you with validation and a DBT skill. And doing all of this by avoiding common invalidating traps or accidentally further escalating the situation. So we're going to get into some case vignettes, which I'm excited about. And I have some here I'm going to share. So before I click the next slide, I'm going to kind of read to you one example. We have 4, as mentioned. This is a vignette that I wrote to describe a student who is on the autism spectrum. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about this example. I want you all to meet Alex, a 15-year-old who asks repetitive personal questions of classmates. When peers don't answer, Alex may raise their voice or get frustrated. He often sits alone at lunch. So before I move on, does anyone have any idea about, just based on that short description, what you think maybe is happening for Alex as a result of not getting those questions answered and then sitting alone at lunch? Does anyone have any ideas how this may be impacting him?
I have some ideas as being autistic myself. I think according to the story, it sounds like he's trying to connect with other people in a way that he knows how, but it isn't working. And so he's still isolated and alone.
Thank you all for sharing that, and also sharing about your lived experience. I really appreciate that.
It's right here.
Yeah, exactly. Where we're seeing is a difficulty with social flexibility. He probably has high anxiety as a result of the isolation that he's experiencing, and maybe even some sensory overwhelm, right? That could oftentimes lead to bigger emotions. So we see, if we're looking at it just from the surface, this is a person who maybe could be characterized as intrusive, rude, who's not respecting people's boundaries, who's annoying, all these things, right? And we can understand maybe why people would look at him that way, but he's being misunderstood and he's being mischaracterized. And ultimately, that's a lot of judgment towards Alex. And if we ask ourselves what's maybe happening underneath the surface, and understanding that his neurodivergence, that his brain is wired differently, that there's social communication differences there, that he probably experiences anxiety, and maybe that leads him to keep asking the question. What his goal is connection. He wants to feel like he has peers, but he maybe goes about it in a way that would feel kind of atypical. And so he needs to be shown a different way. And so what we can do is we can validate Alex and we can say something like, I can see you're really curious, and it feels upsetting when people don't answer you. I imagine you feel disregarded or not cared for. And what we could do in that moment is we can say, hey, because we just validated him, we can say, hey, if you're open to it, I wonder if there's something I can teach you right now to kind of manage the dysregulation or upsetness that you're experiencing right now. Can I teach you the skill called stop? Stop really allows for pause and notice. And especially when we're really distressed for ourselves and for the student, it can be very effective. So let's just remind ourselves, what does the acronym STOP stand for? In case you haven't noticed, DBT loves acronyms. So STOP stands for, the S is stop, what you're doing, like immediately. The T stands for take a step back. O, observe. P, proceed mindfully. So maybe teaching Alex the stop skill could be a way for him to notice what's going on, what he is feeling, and how people are also responding to him. We can also encourage him mindfulness of body sensations. Sometimes clients don't always understand what emotion they're experiencing, and what we are feeling somatically or physically can be a communication of, oh, I have this like physical sensation in my stomach that oftentimes is like an indication of anxiety. Maybe that's what I'm feeling right now is anxiety, because they may not have the language to articulate what it is that they're feeling. So mindfulness of body sensations ultimately increases awareness. And some people are better at like being in their body than they are in their minds. And other people are more cerebral than they are somatic. So it's understanding like, what are they going to respond better to? What we want to avoid in this situation is scolding or shaming. Because when we do that, inevitably Alex is going to shut down. And then there is little to no chance for skill building when he is shut down. So there's different ways for connection. Maybe we can tell Alex, hey, it seems like you're interested in like learning more about this person. Well, let's talk about, how it may be upsetting, then feel like they're not interested in being friends with you when you keep asking when you keep asking the same question. Maybe that's a sign we have to ask a different question. What are some other questions that, that come to mind that maybe you can ask that person? Because maybe they're not comfortable answering this exact question, and that's not personal. It's just the question is really personal. Maybe you don't have a relationship yet where they feel ready to answer that. Does anyone have another example of a validating phrase that you could use in this moment with Alex? Different language that you could use, like you see him upset, you see him withdrawn, maybe you observed him at lunch, he's trying but he just can't make contact, he can't, how can you approach Alex based on what you're observing? What could you say that would be validating for him? And this is practice, so it's better to get feedback here so then you feel more equipped in your sessions with them.
Well, I find oftentimes when people are attempting to validate another person's emotions, they express having experienced the same emotion before. So you could say something like, Alex, I understand that you want to connect with this person. I've been there before, you know. Um, we all want to make connections and feel connected, and maybe go from there.
That's great, Will. What I really appreciate that you mentioned that I didn't, and this is why I love participation is because you just highlighted normalizing his experience. And that can be very validating, because that is true. All of us humans want connection. We want relationships. We want friendship, especially the students that you're working with, right? So normalizing it and say it's not wrong that you're trying to make friends, that you feel lonely and that you're trying to do something about it. That's you being proactive and resourceful. Let's highlight like the courage that it takes to maybe go and try to talk to a stranger or someone you don't know. We just have to maybe look at fine-tuning our approach a little bit. Maybe we're realizing this isn't working and there's another way.
Yeah.
Kristen? Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let Will respond really quickly.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think it could be especially helpful for those of us on the spectrum, or other, people probably, who feel alienated
Yes.
because of who they are. Yeah,
Thank you,
that's
Will.
all.
Kristen?
Hi. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, I guess, reflect on the fact that we're discussing someone who's been asking intrusive personal questions of other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to model asking intrusive personal questions of this student as well, right? So I think I'd also just want to maybe recognize the fact that sometimes validating people's feelings by naming them can feel like assumptions are being made about what feelings are being experienced as well. So, like, I know that can be tricky, but I would just say, especially people on the spectrum, and I'm speaking as a parent of two kids on the spectrum. Emotions don't always present in others the way that we might expect. So I'd just say that it can also be important to not assume that that what might look like disconnection from the outside might be something else. So I just want to say, like, to encourage, like in the case of my kids who find it very intrusive to be asked directly about their feelings, that sometimes just connecting as a person, not directly inquiring after feelings, can be good as well, right? Like, tell me about your day. What was something good in your day? Or like, like to sometimes not directly pressing and putting on the spot about feelings is something to think about as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're raising here, and I think it's super relevant, and I appreciate your share and also your lived experience, is depending on the person, and really, regardless of neurodivergence or if they're neurotypical, like some people may have a harder time accessing their emotions and talking about them. And so there may be a different way to approach them that doesn't feel so pointed, right? Or so directed at, to where they now feel like put on the spot. Did I reflect back what you said correctly?
Yeah, thanks. But particularly because of the situation that we're trying to address, right? Which is them asking intrusive personal questions of others, right?
Yeah.
Like, there might not be a marked difference for this person between what they're being kind of not accused of, but noticed for doing, and what they feel this adult is doing to them right now. Right? Like, yeah. I mean, my students don't always want to talk about their feelings with me as their teacher. Sometimes it can be like we're not necessarily safe people. Like, we should be like safe people in a learning setting. But I guess I'm wanting to tread with caution about um, pressing students about their emotions when they might not really be comfortable doing that as well.
Yeah, and I think what really is the most important thing is just to maintain a curious stance. When we are certain about something, that leaves zero room for collaboration. And so letting your well, this is what I tell pretty much anyone that I work with, whether they're a patient of mine, whether it's a parent, whether it's a key collective client, you all here today, curiosity is your best tool. When you allow yourself to be curious about yourself and someone else's emotional experience or just their lived experience, it gives them an opportunity to confirm whether or not what you're thinking is true. And we don't want to assume. When we make assumptions, we really risk misinterpreting. And a lot of times our assumptions can be rooted in judgment. So we want to ask in a way that feels safe and appropriate. But also, if you find that the student is not really comfortable talking about their feelings, then we want to respect and honor that. Noticing that, they may be presenting this way and being curious about, hey, I noticed that you're kind of alone at lunch and you look a little sad. Do you feel sad? Are you feeling sadness? And then working with how they respond. It's not inappropriate to inquire. It's about initially, it's more about how do you respond to their level of comfort of engaging with you, right? So ADHD, our next case vignette. Before I want to actually read it to you guys, so I don't want to give away too much information. So I'm going to talk about our next student, who is Jordan, a 16-year-old who frequently interrupts, fidgets, and loses track of directions. Often he gives up mid-task. So we're talking about a student here who seems to be a little impulsive, who has a hard time following direction and also remembering things. He's interrupting people, so we can imagine that others, whether it's the teacher or classmates, get annoyed with that because they feel disrespected. But underneath that, what do you think is going on for Jordan? Does anyone have any thoughts? Because just like Alex, there's probably a high probability that Jordan is being misunderstood and mischaracterized and judged. No? Okay. Rosalind. Perfect. Thank you.
I was just going to say that I know that sometimes I interrupt a lot. And I know that I've been accused, and I'm from the East Coast, we talk over each other. And I thought that was it. But I realized that there's actually more to it. As someone who's had a little bit of trauma in my own life, that one of the reasons I might interrupt a lot is when I get very excited and I want to share something. And I just don't have the ability to hold it back. Yeah. And I just sort of bubble over, and I want to share it so badly that it just comes out, and it can look rude to people, but it's not meant that way. It's meant out of excitement and wanting to share.
Absolutely. Yes. And see, you're coming from a place of eagerness and excitement, and then that gets mislabeled as you can't wait your turn. You're monopolizing conversations. And then that judgment impacts the way that person treats you and views you, right?
Absolutely, because then there's insecurity. Oh my God, did I just interrupt a whole lot? Oh my God, did I make that person feel bad? And then I walk away with all of these insecurities about that interaction. And that person may not have any feelings about it whatsoever, but I'm now overthinking the whole thing.
Right. Yes. And we're off to the races, and we're spiraling now over it, right?
Exactly.
Yep. Thank you for sharing about that. I appreciate that. Joseph?
Yeah, just kind of going off of what Rosalind said, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think that in our society, there's a lot of crosstalk, and sometimes I think people struggle with feeling like they're heard. And so the interruption, might be a way of like wanting to it's like almost like kind of like overexcited or overeager. It's not like they're trying to be rude or that they have bad intentions. Instead, I think like, maybe they feel like they're not heard, and then maybe they haven't, they're not sure how to express themselves, and then they get misunderstood. People think that they're rude or whatever it is, but I think it's like, if we try to slow down and like create space for people to talk, and just allow them to say their piece, and then we say our piece. I think that kind of, I've tried doing that with students before, and I've noticed that it does really like if I'm talking and then they interrupt me, I'm just like, okay, just just say what you have to say, and then I'll say what I have to say, rather than trying to be like, oh, like I'm talking, blah blah, and like try and like get into like some kind of like back and forth with them. And then it might not work overnight, but eventually, if you kind of just like, yeah, like even perhaps slowing down how you're talking and speaking more mindfully and just like allowing them the space to talk, sometimes modeling that helps them to, you know, like modify their own behavior as well. And also just keeping in mind that they're probably not doing it to be rude. I mean, they probably just feel like, yeah, like they're not heard, and who knows what kind of like or crosstalk is also going on in their own head.
Exactly. All very great points to raise. And, you guys are a lot more like attuned to your students and aware, and probably have more of kind of training them, maybe like a main, maybe this is presumptuous of me, but in a traditional classroom, right, where you're trying to manage 30 kids, and there may be students that come to you guys for like certain courses and go to other schools, or are going to be in other situations where they're not going to be with someone that is so patient and tolerant. It's important for them to learn in a compassionate environment. Like, hey, I notice right now that you really want to like get this point out. You want to talk about it. I want to hear it, and I'm really excited to hear it. But let me just finish this thought really quickly. Like, that's also in some ways preparing them for the real world, because not everyone out there is going to be as understanding as you guys are. And it's also a very different environment and setting that can be more controlled than the real world. So with this student, there's probably underneath all of the interruption and fidgeting and losing of directions, giving up mid task, there's probably a lot of impulsivity right there that he's trying to manage because of his neurodivergence. Having ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, we tend to have a hard time with impulse control, and that can very much be can manifest in conversations and with memory. So this student perhaps, has struggled with impulsivity, has shame, and has low tolerance for frustration. For example, he's giving up mid-task. That probably says something. So how do we want to respond from a dialectical behavioral therapy lens? Well, we can validate by saying, hey, it makes sense. It's hard to stay focused when your brain moves so fast. I can understand that at times that's really frustrating, that you can't keep up. And then we might use mindfulness of what is called one mindfully, teaching Jordan to focus on one step at a time, helping him slow down a little bit. And what does that mean, one mindfully? Well, it kind of means what it does, doing one thing at a time with your full attention, not distracted, not disjointed. You're focusing on one task at a time, bringing your mind back when it wanders, which it naturally will, and being present in the task that you're doing without judgment you have towards yourself. Because that judgment that he has only fuels the shame that he's already experiencing. And something else that we can use as a DBT skill is checking the facts. And this can be really helpful in reducing the self-criticism that he oftentimes holds about himself. So this is I love this skill. It's really awesome. It's a emotional regulation skill. And basically what it does is our emotions, all emotions have what is called action urges. And we're going to talk more about this in a different slide. But for example, shame oftentimes results in us wanting to withdraw, isolate. We're embarrassed. We don't want to be seen. And so emotions are powerful, but they also sometimes don't actually fit the actual situation. And that can be due to like a misinterpretation of what's actually happening. And so checking the facts helps us pause and asks ourselves, is the emotion I'm experiencing right now actually match what's happening? Sometimes we actually experience the wrong emotion. So what to do when checking the facts is name the emotion you're feeling, then understand the prompting event that led to this emotion. So what happened that led to this shame I'm feeling, for example? Ask if our interpretation fits the facts. Could there be another explanation? Could there be something else that's going on? And then adjust your response as needed. So if the facts match, the emotion then makes sense in some, right? But if not, then maybe we can shift on how we're reacting. So here's an example that a couple examples I came up with you guys. Let's say, and again, I don't think anyone here would actually have this thought, but I wanted to make it really like basic and simple to understand for the purpose of the exercise. So let's say there's a student that's on the autism spectrum and doesn't look at the instructor, the teacher when talking. Another environment of someone who isn't informed about, neurodivergence may see that as like rude. Why are you not looking at me when I'm talking to you? And so that person may end up feeling frustrated and think, gosh, that's disrespectful of them. Well, let's check the facts. What we know is that many people on the autism spectrum find eye contact really overwhelming, and it can be hard for them to maintain prolonged eye contact. The facts show that the behavior isn't disrespect. Instead, it's regulation. By not maintaining eye contact, that's actually a way for them to regulate themselves, because looking at someone for too long can become dysregulating. That adjusted response after checking the facts and being curious helps lower that person's expectation for eye contact from this individual, and instead puts the effort on focusing on what the student's words are versus the way that they're showing up physically. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, good. I have a note here. Checking the facts is like being a detective with our emotions. We pause, we ask what happened, and we see if our reaction matches reality. We don't judge ourselves for having a misalignment there, but that's just something to kind of think about and for yourself too. Maybe you're working with a student that really activates you. Is it the student or is it something else coming up for you? Let's check the facts about it. Let's be curious. Does anyone have an idea of how you could break a task into one mindful steps in your subject area? Or maybe you're already doing this? Yes.
Yeah, for essay writing, for example, this is kind of like protocol anyway, is that you focus on one section at a time. So if it's a research article, you bring in all of your research facts that you wish to bring in, that you wish to write about, you wish to expand on, but you don't quite expand on them yet. You just bring in them into conversation, into discussion, and then maybe we start to focus on an introduction after the research is done. Now, if you want to expand on your ideas, you create a brain map or a mind map or just an organization example, and you section that in either in different class periods or in different time periods during the class session, and focus on that primarily and try not to mix and match like paragraph ideas and sections, even though ideas can get really big and really overwhelming at times as well. It is really important for students to just hone in on a topic, do the research, and separate out the facts when it's time.
I love that. And also something that I feel very confident in talking about is, in order to build self-esteem, you have to, the way to do that is to oftentimes like have completion of tasks, to see something through. that helps increase one's self-esteem. And so sometimes what happens is people are kind of set up for failure, where it's like, yeah, if the expectation was go write this essay and we're not going to break it into chunks, that's going to feel really overwhelming. They're not going to know where to start. There's no room for breaking and pausing and feedback. They're going to have a hard time just initiating the task, right? And then what ends up happening is they don't ever complete it, and then there's something esteemable about not completing a task, right? So we want to actually help this person figure out what are the steps that you need to take. And as they take each step, they're building their confidence. Like, I'm doing it, and this, yes, has felt hard, and I'm still pushing through, and I'm still making it to the next step. And like, that's how they end up feeling more capable in the long run and able to do more, is because they've done it before and they were successful. And yeah, maybe it took a little longer for them. Who cares? At the end of the day, they did it, right? Kristen, I think you might have had a hand up, but I don't know if
Um, um, yeah, so I was just gonna echo what Alana said, I think, and say that I feel like a lot of the work that I do, and something that one-on-one really enables actually, is breaking things down into smaller chunks. And I break them down until I can get it to a chunk that can be done in that lesson, in that moment. And that's always the key, is sort of to find that thing that can be done. And perhaps it's just figuring out, maybe there's a word that has a definition that's unclear, and we can find out the definition of that word together, and like, yeah, we've done, we've learned something. So yeah, breaking it down into chunks is like the the thing that yeah, can really be enabling and empowering, I find.
yes, absolutely. Will?
Hi, yeah. Well, I mainly teach mathematics, and so I often focus with my students on, well, let me reset. Every hard question is most often a bunch of easy questions rolled into one. And so I teach my students to approach the questions by basically doing the first easiest thing that they can do. And there's usually one thing that's kind of sticking out, like, oh, I could add 3 to both sides. I don't know what I'm going to do after that, but don't worry about that. Just add 3 to both sides, And now what's the next easiest thing you can do? And then, oh no, maybe square both sides. Okay, so that kind of thing. And next thing you know, they've unraveled the knot that was the equation and solved for the variable. You know. So that's kind of the way I. And sometimes I give an analogy of the cleaning the room analogy, where your room is a mess. It's like whatever. It's a train wreck. It's a tornado. It's whatever you want to call it. And it's overwhelming. And if you're told to clean your room, it's like, I don't even know where to start. I can't possibly do this. So I tell them, yeah, well, then again, you have a pile of clothes with some books on top and then some CDs on top of the, well, no one has CDs anymore. Okay, let's just say books on top of that. then, then you can say, okay, well, what's the first easiest thing you can do? Take the books off the top of the pile, put those where they go. Next thing you know, you're done with the books. Now you get that laundry. Well, maybe it should go in the laundry bin. And now you got so that kind of thing. So it's like breaking it into the first easiest task that can be done, and then going from there.
I love the analogy. I think sometimes people have an easier time understanding when we use analogies. And so I encourage you to continue doing that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And you guys have an opportunity to really understand the student on a much probably deeper level than a mainstream school, because of just that one-on-one time that you get with them, which is awesome. So case 3, I keep going off before I need to read it to you. Apologies. So we're going to talk about just someone with a learning difference, right? And I have Maya here. She's 14 years old. She shuts down in math and says often, "I'm stupid." She refuses to try and may tear up worksheets. So from the outside, many probably would think, gee, she's probably really difficult to teach when she's that disruptive, and she's tearing up worksheets, and she probably, you know, further escalates, and she doesn't have a lot of confidence. That must feel probably really hard. But of course, underneath that, there's also a lot of shame and negative self-beliefs that she holds about herself. And there's also an avoidance to protect against failure. By her tearing up the worksheets, what she's basically communicating is, I don't want to try it anymore, because failing feels really, really uncomfortable. And when you're observing behavior, we have to remind ourselves, behaviors equal communications. Especially for clients that don't always have the language or the ability to articulate what they are experiencing internally, they will oftentimes show it in a acting out way, right? In an expressive way. And that's because they don't know however else to do it. And that's where we can come in and show them that there's also different ways to manage those emotions and to communicate their needs and ask for them to be honored. And so in this situation, you know, it's probably going to be really important. It's always important to come from a validating stance as best as we can, because she already has all these like horrible thoughts and feelings about herself. So what could we say to her? This feels really discouraging. You don't want to keep going. I understand that you want to be perfect, and it's okay to also struggle along the way. Radical acceptance can be really helpful in these situations, because when you are born with a learning difference, that is obviously not something that can be treated. That is always going to be present. And it's sometimes can be really relieving to engage in radical acceptance, and other times it can be really hard, because what that means is we're relinquishing control. We're kind of, you know, surrendering a little bit. And it can be painful to do that. But radical acceptance helps in that, yes, learning differences are very real, but that doesn't mean that you're less capable. That doesn't mean that you can't achieve your goals. Instead, a DBT approach may suggest opposite action, which is kind of what I was referencing a little bit earlier around how each emotion has an action urge. For example, shame makes us retreat, anger makes us want to fight. It's not always effective to act on that emotion in that moment, even if we've already checked the facts and we've determined that this is the right emotion that we're feeling. It may not always be appropriate because time and place. So opposite action can be a really helpful skill for you all to learn in your own lives, and to model for our students, that you may want to just shut down and not do anything. But if you do opposite action and instead start with one very small or achievable step, what we might end up doing is actually getting through the assignment and then being able to challenge some of those negative self-beliefs. See, what do you mean you did it? What we want to avoid in these situations, which can be very easy to do, and it oftentimes comes from a very caring place, is this idea of over cheerleading. You're smart, you can do it, because that can feel oftentimes invalidating. You know, this person does have a learning difference. That means it is going to be harder for them. And, you know, fortunately, hopefully the student is at a school like Tilden Prep where they have the necessary accommodations, and they work with educators that understand their differences and can provide different strategies and techniques to complete the assignment or to learn or engage in the material, right? But saying you got it, it's not a big deal, that's dismissive of actually the struggle that they objectively have. But helping them do the opposite of what they want to do, in this case, start with one achievable step, will also manage the emotion that they're feeling in a more tolerable way. Self-soothing and grounding techniques can also be really helpful in this moment before we get to the opposite action. They're clearly distressed. They're really upset. helping them engage in some breathing techniques, or maybe lighting, like smelling something like an essential oil, or playing with like a tactile thing may be helpful in grounding them, and then moving on into trying to do some sort of opposite action. I think you all probably know what, at this point, what validation sounds like versus invalidation. But if anyone wants to, give an example, I'm happy to hear. Moving on. Okay. Does this all make sense so far? This kind of profile and the skills that we're talking about? Okay. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name right.
Maha.
Maha, yes.
Yeah, I want to share about what the last case you shared with us, learning differences.
Yeah.
So usually as a former Montessori teacher, what do we do in this case when we have a student, to acknowledge, we don't want them to believe they are okay and nothing wrong. We need to make them feel that we understand there is an issue here and we try together to solve the problem. This is the first thing. And then we try to stop every learning and try to build their confidence, because without confidence they can't learn anything. And starting with science, how our brain is built, how we process the information, and how there is like multiple people and there is multiple ways to learn. So it's okay to be different. So to accept themselves and to try multiple methods. And then also from our sides, it's very important with students with learning differences to build this relationship between a teacher and student. They have to trust you. If they don't trust you, they are not going to learn from you. And no matter you're going to try to make them feel better, you make it worse actually, because they knew you're lying to them. And like move to their level. Don't ask them to move to your expectation. Lower your expectation and have a different plan for them. And start with small steps to make them to gain this confidence, and then you can help them to achieve to learn from you actually. So these are the steps we usually use. With plus minus, there is a lot of resources. You make them you share different scenarios that happen to you, something personal. They are always interested to hear from your personal experiences with when you were like studying math and like something happened with your teacher. They are very curious and they just keep, oh really, this thing happened before, and you are a math teacher now? Oh, is that like can happen? So yeah, these are all things. Make them feel secured and you accept them the way they are, and modify, and your change, modify your expectation, and try to achieve small step at a time.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I could not agree anymore. And you did such a great job actually kind of combining multiple things that we talked about and really sharing it in such a succinct way. You talked about radical acceptance. You talked about, not coming from a place of judgment. You talked about, understanding that, you may need to tweak your approach. All of these things are really important for at the end of the day, for creating a supportive, stable relationship between you and the student, which, to your point, if there isn't a relationship there built on safety and trust, doesn't matter how great of an educator or instructor you are, that student is not going to learn. So I agree completely. So we're going to talk about this last case study, which is Devin, a 17-year-old who refuses assignments and says, "This school is just like the last one." And when he's redirected, he may slam a book, he may swear, and he may storm out. So this is someone that would probably be labeled as, this is a behavioral kid. This is a kid with a lot of issues, who is really hard to work with, who doesn't allow for guidance and direction, and is disrespectful. And I know that you guys are working with probably maybe more of these kinds of profiles, right? And it's hard on you. Let's just validate what your experience is like. Let's have compassion for ourselves that yes, of course, that person maybe most likely has a trauma history, and these behaviors are driven by their trauma. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily, acceptable. I mean, we can understand why like they're acting this way. We can have compassion for the situation, but that certainly does make your job more difficult. And so how do we work with this? How do we not risk invalidating the student and furthering creating trauma, but how do we also protect ourselves? Well, this person probably most likely, based on what he said, this school is just like the last one. That's probably an indication that there's some school trauma. There's some past school trauma, mistrust. School is seen as an unsafe, threatening place. And so he's responding from like a place of feeling threatened, right? His behavior is showing that, oh, I feel unsafe. And his way and the way of acting out is a way to self-protect, because what ends up happening is probably nothing, right? It stops the teacher, it stops whatever is being taught. And so we need to help Devin figure out a better way to express his feelings and and manage what is coming up for him. So what to validate, we could say school is probably, I imagine school has been really painful for you before. It makes sense. It's hard to trust here. What are some things that I could do that can make you feel more safe? What do you think you need in this moment? Asking, being curious. We can then introduce the distress tolerance skill tip. T stands for temperature, I stands for intense exercise, P stands for paced breathing, and the second P stands for progressive muscle relaxation. I remember I taught this in the winter, and we talked about the idea of, do you guys have like ice packs or something that the student, ideally how this skill is done is a person submerges their face in a bowl of ice water. That's regulating for the nervous system. It brings the level of activation down. Intense exercise such as jumping jacks, jump rope, even just running around helps lower their heart rate. Paced breathing in slowly and out, breathing in for 4, holding for 4, releasing for 4 is really regulating. And so is progressive muscle relaxation, where you for example, like clench your fists really tight and then you release, and then that is a way to better regulate. This is very focused on the body. So students who are visibly getting like really upset, turning red and like clenching, this would be a really great skill to teach them. There's also an opportunity to do some interpersonal effectiveness, because obviously this kind of behavior doesn't really allow for a lot of support. When there's cursing, swearing, being disruptive, you can't really help that person. So we need to teach them something about a better way to communicate, which there's a great skill called Dear Man. And the D stands for describe, the E stands for express, A for assert, R for reinforce. So the first part, the dear, is basically what you're doing. And the man is how you're doing it. So the M is mindfully. A is for appearing confidently. You're doing this in a confident tone. And N is negotiate. You're offering flexibility. You're willing to compromise. So, for example, we can use one that I came up with and how to do Dear Man. So describing is state the situation factually without judgment. Expressing is sharing your own feelings or validating theirs. The A, asserting, is ask directly for what you want and state your boundary. R is reinforce, so highlight the positives of cooperation. So I'm going to now do the whole skill, Dear Man, as an example for you guys to see what it sounds like. And this would be from like your perspective as the teacher. I gave you the essay prompt just now. I hear that this brings up memories of being judged in the past, and that feels painful. I'd like us to look at this prompt together and find one part that feels manageable. If we start together, I think it will feel less overwhelming and you'll see your progress. And then that's the dear part. The mindful part is return gently to the task if they spiral. So if they're becoming a more dysregulated, say, let's come back to just one step. Let's pick this topic. You're doing this in a way where you're using a steady and calm tone, and also calm body language. That's how you are appearing as you are saying this. And then you're willing to negotiate and offer flexibility. So then you could say, if writing the whole essay feels too big, how about we just brainstorm ideas for 5 to 10 minutes today? And you described, you expressed, you inserted, you reinforced. And you did it in a mindful way. You appeared confident, and you were willing to negotiate. This is really important to model for especially adolescents who are developing and growing and learning how to show up in relationships and respect boundaries and how to communicate needs. I really suggest this is something that you guys can like really prioritize in your sessions. Another example that I came up with for a student that maybe is on the autism spectrum, that you can do a dear man. Let's say a student gets very anxious when there's a schedule change. Maybe someone is subbing in for you guys from one of you because you got sick, or the schedule is different because of an assembly or something. They may start to panic. This isn't what we do. I can't handle this. Let's use dear man. Today we have an assembly instead of math class. I see that this feels stressful because you were expecting math. Let's make a plan for where you will sit so you feel more comfortable. If you come with me now, you'll get through it more easily and still earn your break later. And then we're staying focused on the current change, not the past ones. We're calm. We have a predictable tone. We're modeling confidence. And then if we could say, if sitting with the class feels too hard, you can come sit in the back row with me. So we have about 10 minutes left. What we can do is I have this application activity, but we're on Google Meet, so we can't break out into small groups. So we can do this at like as a big group for like the next couple minutes, and then I think I'll leave the last couple minutes that we'll have for Q&A. Or if there's enough of you that have questions or want to kind of do Q&A, we can skip the application activity. So I'm open. What would feel the best? Does anyone have a preference? No? Okay, let's do a little bit of the application activity, and then we'll just leave the remaining minutes for Q&A. So does someone want to volunteer and think about a student that you're maybe a past student last year, or a student that you'll be seeing this year that have worked with or will be working with, and think about a DBT skill that could support them, and maybe talk about how you would use it, and then maybe a phrase of a validating statement. Alana?
Yes, so I've worked with the student last year and will be working with him this coming semester. And this student in particular, he really likes his phone. He's always using his phone in class, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to pull him away from it. He does have history of learning differences and being on the spectrum as well. So for me, I think Dear Man is a really good application here. I like to, find some sort of validation for his phone use, because he does have a lot of other responsibilities. He has a lot of friends that he likes to stay connected with. So finding some sort of validation to say, yes, like I acknowledge this, I understand this, and making sure that maybe we can have breaks in class where he can use his phone and connect with it. Also, just describing the situation, right? Like, we're in class right now. We have a specific amount of time together. We have we have a list of things to do. Expressing, both the class needs and acknowledging his needs at the same time. Asserting those, maybe particular boundaries as well. Like, we're in class, there's things to do. And hopefully like reinforce that cooperation as well.
That was amazing. Alana, that was great and so like applicable, right, in this situation. And telling him, by us focusing on like our assignments together, then you may have more time at the end, maybe for your phone, or then you won't have to, do as much homework, whatever it is, like reinforcing the value of the cooperation. That was so well done. And you're going to do it in a way where you are mindful and you are appearing confident, and that there's some flexibility. Some things there's room for negotiation, other things not as much. If you feel like you can bend a little bit, that's where you can say, okay, maybe we allow for a 5-minute break in the middle of class for you to check your phone. That's you being flexible. And I loved how you also validated, like, yeah, it feels like, really important to be on your phone, and there's a lot of people that want to talk to you. And I imagine that you are a lot for different people. Like you show up for them, and let's like prioritize this class time that we have right now. Sonia? Oh, you're muted, Sonia.
Sorry. I've been teaching this student for 2 years. I don't see him on my calendar this year, but I have a question. He doesn't like to participate in activity at school, like for example, picnic, like potluck or anything. I always encourage him to participate, to make friends, but he refused to. How can I be successful at encourage him to participate at different activity at school and to make friends?
Yeah, again, there's probably a multitude of reasons why that person's having a hard time making friendships or socializing. And again, we don't want to assume. So being curious and kind of inquiring around, noticing that maybe they're not socializing with other people in a non-shaming way, but like offering, hey, like, is it because you feel anxious? Is it because, you don't like anyone? Like, what is it that is like preventing that person from making contact and socializing? First is the step. And then second is trying to figure out, okay, well, where in their reasoning can you offer like alternatives? So like if they say, well, I'm just afraid that everyone's going to judge me and no one's going to like me. Well, like, let's check the facts around that. Is it possible that someone like that every single person here would judge you? Why would they judge you? A lot of times social anxiety is rooted in judgment. It's like their fixation on how they're going to be perceived, and it's irrational, right? They think that they are going to be, and maybe that's because they've been ostracized. So like maybe in the past that's something that's happened, and so they're afraid of that being recreated, and so they become avoidant.
I think I learned that he does have online friends, and he likes to play like online games, and that keep him awake at night. So that's why that make him tired during the day, and that's why he could not focus during the day. So I try to encourage him to make friends during the day, not at night. Online friends.
Yeah, and sometimes like there has to be enough willingness on their end, Some people, are going to just be very adamant about this is a new thing since COVID, where we're seeing a lot of adolescents having lots of friendships virtually, but not in real life. And obviously it makes sense why there'd be some kind of, concern around that, because we want them to be able to socialize. And there's only so much you can also do in that moment. By being curious and offering support, maybe they'll come around, and maybe there'll be a time where they're willing to talk more about it. We also want to respect that maybe that's not something they're interested in right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. So we can kind of, with the last couple minutes we have, I wanted to just go over key takeaways. As I've said these things before, behavior is like a demonstration of or communication of needs. And that DBT can help teachers respond with validation plus skills. And every student can learn how to regulate and connect with the proper support. So here's my contact information. If anyone has any questions, or they want to, talk through a case or, get some additional one-on-one support, I am happy to be available and to connect with you all and to do one-on-ones. I really value all the work that you guys are doing. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or things they'd like to share or talk about? If you also have a referral for a student that you could really benefit from a mentor, you can reach out to me or Harmony, our director of partnerships. Lori.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this was fantastic. It was really incredible. And I think, definitely the information you were sharing, Chandler, was spot on. And I think I love the vignettes. But also just I'm sitting here with the heads of school here at Walnut Creek, and we're just so happy to hear the participation and just how you guys are thinking about this and processing the information, which is all that I could have dreamed of and more. So I really hope that you guys felt like this was meaningful. And, I look forward. I was taking notes, so I have some thoughts about how we can continue the conversation during our huddles, because I also feel like I want you guys to know at what point can you just say, you know what, this is too much for me. I'm going to bring a head of school in,
Yes.
So that's definitely something I want to touch on when we're in the huddles. But I feel so good about what you share, Chandler, and just the skills, the ability to observe and identify. So thank you, and thank you guys for taking this to heart and being so thoughtful. Really, it was really nice to just listen to what you guys were saying.
I just want to echo what Lori said. You guys are always so participatory and engaged. And I mean, that is awesome. All the students are so lucky to be at Tilden Prep. It is, again, an honor and pleasure. Thank you for welcoming. Thank you for the time. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to be involved in whichever way I can. Lori will obviously stay in touch, but to all of you, have an incredible school year. Keep up doing the great work, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, Chandler.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Enjoy tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
much for the first one. Carter Jacks? Who's the price? Price inside. And those little graphic. Take them home. Pure leaf, and this brute tea. Gum. Incense. You're going home. Well, now I have. All right, well, I'll see you guys. Tomorrow? Yep. Are we supposed to log this hour? The training? Didn't say, but I guess you do. You sent an email, I guess. Ask. Because yeah, I'll be able to keep track of like, who showed up. So right. They rely on people to self. Sounds good.